We had dinner together last night. You were downtown. You stayed near here, across from the Coliseum. It's a lot different in California.
You know,
In all the good ways.
it's different than some parts of California. So I grew up in Long Beach, California, which is pretty different from some of the fancier places. And you know, there's California, there's California, is what we always say. So it's actually more familiar than you think.
Well, we're really excited to have you here. One part of your bio that always sticks out to me is you're 29 years old. You sold a company for $2.3 billion on Facebook. And then you started another one. So why don't you tell us about the story about Androll, first of all? Why did you start it? Tell us about that process and what it means to you.
So to talk about Androll, I kind of have to go into the past. Most people know me for Oculus. That's what everybody always talks about in the intros. And that's because I sold it for a lot of money. But actually, before I started Oculus, I worked at an Army Affiliate Research Center, the ICT Mixed Reality Lab, on an Army program called BraveMind that was treating veterans with PTSD using virtual reality exposure. So that was sort of my first real job. It wasn't minimum wage. And I did that while I was putting myself through college. And I did got exposure to a lot of cool things, but also learned a lot about how DoD worked, learned a lot about how DoD didn't work. And when I sold my company to Facebook, they immediately killed all of our work with DoD. And the reason I started Androll was I worked at Facebook as an executive for a few years for a few years before they fired me. And I became concerned about a few trends. One, the biggest tech companies in the United States are not working with the Department of Defense. It's never been true in history. There's never been a point in history where the most valuable companies in our country refuse to work with DoD. And the reason they do that, and the smokescreen reason that they give to the media, is that they're just listening to their employees. That's false. It's not actually an ideological play. If it was, it'd be easy to just change their ideology. The real problem is they are fundamentally beholden to the Chinese Communist Party, either through desire to be there in the future or because their current business is wholly dependent on manufacturing that takes place there, on talent that takes place there. You can't convince them of that. They're making a rational decision that's very bad for the country, unfortunately. And then you combine that with the fact that it's very hard for lots of startups to work in the defense space. For to one of the questions, how can it become easier to work with DoD? It's so bad, it's so hard to work with DoD that most startups shouldn't do it. And that's a controversial opinion, I know, in a place like this, but I'm speaking practically. Most small companies shouldn't work with DoD if they're thinking rationally. It's such a hard customer to work with. You're probably going to do better in enterprise or consumer. And what that really means is everyone work with defense. They're doing it for irrational reasons, usually that they want to help their country. And so finally get back to what you asked, why did I do this? Because I wanted to make that decision. I could have started a company doing anything. I had an enormous amount of money from the sale. I could have worked in the video games industry. I love video games. I love virtual reality. I would have been thrilled to work on it for the rest of my life. But I also wanted to do something that was more important and mattered that other people were not doing. And that's why I'm in the defense space. I think that's true for a lot of people here. You're not here because you couldn't be making more money working in the finance sector, the biotech sector, or really doing just about anything. But that was why I started Androll. I wanted to work on something.
So tell us about Androll. What do you do?
We do a lot of stuff. So we're about 900 people. We're headquartered in Orange County, California. We've got offices across the country. Our big thrust is applying artificial intelligence to DoD systems. Before anyone asks me, Palmer, where do you get expertise in AI? The answer is I don't. That's never been my expertise. But what I wanted to do is start a defense products company. So not a defense contractor that relies on the government and taxpayers to fund all our R&D, but to take my own money, put it developing new products and sell them to the government when they already work. It's a radical business model for DoD, but it's the way that basically every company and every other industry works. So our thinking was, how can we use autonomy to make the right systems that other people are not going to make otherwise? And I'm not talking about making existing systems, existing fighter jets or boats or submarines a little bit better with autonomy. I'm saying, what would you build if you had autonomy from the very beginning? And I know that sounds really cliche, but it makes a big difference in how you develop it. It's like, up to this point, suppose that the best way to solve a problem were to have 10,000 autonomous systems operating in some area, all at a small scale individually. That's never been possible before because you would have had people that are manually operating those. There's no real way to actually make that happen. Sometimes it makes more sense to have one thing in that same area that's immensely capable. And that's where the DoD is the focus, is building these immensely capable platforms that are operated by a small number of people because you can't have an infinite number of people. But if you can have artificially intelligent systems, and you don't have to make them really smart, the smartest system we make is dumber than the dumbest person, but sometimes the dumbest person is enough. And that's look, there's a lot of systems where all they need to do is just wait for a thing and the guy pushes a button. If you can automate all of that, then you can have people focusing on things. People do good. People shouldn't be watching dozens of security camera feeds at the same time trying to figure out what's going on. They shouldn't be just standing there so they can turn something on and off based on the fuel level. Like it's crazy the jobs that people in Unity can end up having. The job sounds really cool, but sometimes it boils down to, yeah, I stand when the generator's almost out of fuel, I turn it off so that it doesn't start the engine. We don't need to have people who are focused on that. They need to be focused on what people get at.
So you heard a little bit ago about
we build drones, we build cameras, we build autonomous surveillance systems, we build underwater vehicles, all powered by autonomy. I realized I didn't actually answer the question.
But that's what I want to focus on. So you heard a moment ago a panel from leaders from the defense industry in Northeast Indiana. Truth be told, a decade ago, we had a lot more defense jobs here than what we do today. But we are growing again, thanks to strong defense budgets and the innovation that's occurring in the national defense arena. But in Northeast Indiana, we make things. We have more manufacturing jobs per capita than any congressional district in the country right here in Northeast Indiana. That's what we're known for. Give us some advice. How do the leaders in this room lure innovators like you to come to Northeast Indiana to build those drones and the manufacturing, the building of the things that you guys innovate in California? How do we get you to come here? What does it take?
So I mean, one of the reasons I'm here is because we're trying to do more in the area. And I think that the key thing to do if you're a company here it's hard because it's different for small companies versus large companies, right? If you're a large company based here, then the right thing to do is to figure out a way we can work together on a program that's at a significant scale where we bring things to the table that you don't have and you bring things to the table that we don't have. Like something that I've been telling some of the companies here. My company, we're about 900 people. We're focused on robotics and artificial intelligence. We're about 2/3 software guys and 1/3 hardware guys. And what I'm not going to do is pivot my company into having thousands and thousands of people doing large scale manufacturing. It's not what my talent is. I haven't done it before. And I hate to say we made all of our stuff in China. I mean, we outsource that to contract manufacturers. And I've got some wild stories about China if you ever want to talk about that. But I'm not going to try to build a company around large scale manufacturing when there's already companies that have workforces that can do it, that already have capacity to do that. When they're already better at it today than I could be with a decade of hard work towards that. I'd rather work on the things that I'm really good at.
Before I open up to questions, I want this to be very interactive. So as you are listening to this, think of good questions and we're going to toss it over to you. But the final question I have for you is, hey, can you paint a picture for us, for some of us who are less creative than you are, of what the future of warfare looks like? How does this new technology that you're innovating, what does it look like in the warfighting domain?
So I talked about it a little bit, but I think it's people doing the things people are good at and machines doing everything else. And that is not how the military has been operated so far. It is a really big change. You hear this kind of media fiction of the future of warfare being terminated, where the robots are the ones that are out there deciding who lives and who dies, and and potentially they're going to kill us all. The reality is bad people are way scarier to me than AI, because there are evil people out there in the world, and evil people with very limited artificial intelligence are a lot scarier to me than AI that's going to kill us all. But I think that the reality is we're not actually going to be dealing with those problems. The real problems we're going to be dealing with is how, in a world where you have more and more fronts we need to compete on, are we going to compete? How are we going to compete with adversaries that are really wild asymmetrical advantages? And I think that the US DoD, luckily, they get more or less the right set of priorities. But so sorry to anyone in the room who's on the wrong side of this thing. I feel like the DoD is spending a lot of money building things that are relevant to fighting the last few wars. And I would like to see them investing in the things that are going to be relevant to the next few wars, and not just asymmetrical things that exist today. Everyone's talking about small drones. Everyone knows we need to counter those. But I don't think there's enough effort being, for example, how do we counter things like asymmetric bioweapons and chemical weapons that might be produced using cutting edge capabilities by even non-state actors? These things have generally been the domain of state actors. But as you look at biotech is getting cheaper and cheaper, genetic sequencing is getting cheaper and cheaper, it's getting cheaper and cheaper to engineer bespoke biological systems that are very, very dangerous. And I know guys who are in college who can make really dangerous, scary things. And thank goodness those guys have a good career ahead of them. They're probably going to go do that. But what happens when someone in an adversarial nation is able to do the same thing? It does come in pretty fast. And I don't feel like the Navy's messing with there. Anyway, what does the future look like? It's going to be, I think, a lot more systems because you have autonomy and enabling you to do that. And one example that we have with a real customer, we do a lot of custom support protection. We build autonomous surveillance towers that are all along the border. There's a program of record. It's about a $250 million program. Put 200 towers along the border. And in the past, if you wanted to have a manned surveillance tower, you'd have one guy doing an 8-hour shift on a tower, pointing around looking at stuff. That means 3 full-time people to keep that going 24/7. Every time you add a new sensor, you're adding another 3 fully loaded, salaried, and benefited employees. It's not scalable. You can't add hundreds and hundreds of sensors in all the places you need. But if you can automate that so that all the towers talk to each other, they build a 3D model of where all the things are, they reject everything you don't care about and only fly the targets you care about. Now I can add 10 towers, 100 towers, 1,000 towers to an area, and I can have the same number of people that are actually responding to all of those, all the data coming off. So I think that's what the future of defense is going to look like. It's going to be figuring out the right number of systems to solve the problem without the problem of who's going to man it be the driving force.
How about all of you? Tanner, you have a microphone? I'll log in up here at the front.
Congressman, I know you spent a lot of time in Israel and been back and forth and seen the innovation that they've been able to achieve there. Palmer, you were talking about the fronts that we fought a few years ago. That's a front that's constantly moving. How can we learn from Israel, and then how can we also learn how to develop some of that talent here in Northeast Indiana?
I will say I've actually not had a great time with Israel, just personally in my business, partly because the message I just told you about, using manpower effectively and using autonomy to replace manpower. The candid discussions I've had with the Israeli Defense Forces is we have mandatory conscription. We have more people than we know what to do with, and right now they stand around and they sweep hallways. So if they're all going to stand around our border and link arms and block people coming in, that's fine. We don't need to reduce our manpower. That's always it's an interesting dynamic. It's not something. It's definitely not the problem the United States has. As far as developing talent here, that's probably something I could leave a little bit to you. I will say, it was mentioned before. Some of the companies here are importing a lot of talent. That's why I located my company in Orange County, California. I started Oculus down in Orange County. I was able to import people from all over the country. There's a lot of people where I can convince them, hey, this is a place with good schools, good infrastructure, reasonable cost of living in the context of California. So really not reasonable at all. But one of the things that happened when Facebook bought my company, I moved up to Silicon Valley for several years and worked as an executive there, still running the Oculus side of things. And I found out that as soon as I was in Silicon Valley, I couldn't attract people who were not already in Silicon Valley. Nobody who isn't in Silicon Valley wants to be there. Most of the people who are there don't want to be there. I could never get somebody from Indiana or Ohio or Florida to move to the Bay Area. And so that was why when I started Amarillo, I moved back down to Orange County. Because it's so important to be in a place that is attractive to people that are all across the country. So one of the best ways to get talent is just steal them from other places. You gotta make a pitch. I think a lot of people, they're not necessarily thinking about where they want to be, but if you can reach them and say, hey, this is a good place to be, it's a good place to grow a family, it's a good place to build a career, then you can steal them out of a lot of these terrible places that are stuck right now, like San Francisco.
So in the sense of anti-submarine warfare, right, you talked about different sensors. So again, as we'll talk later in my panel about the sensors we make and things. As we look at autonomous or interconnecting different sensors in the ocean or through space or others, the different services, or even within each service, there's a lot of stovepipes, a lot of infrastructure barriers that we found, right? So if we want to integrate more of the data, you're talking to 10 different services or different folks. So what's your strategy, I guess, or philosophy of trying to help break down some of those stovepipes so that we can combine some of these capabilities, whether it's autonomous or artificial intelligence, to do, to find more submarines rather than find quieter submarines versus each mission does its own specific thing?
There's not all that much I can do to help break down the barriers, but what I can do is make it easier for the customer to break down those barriers themselves. So one of the things that we do is our artificial intelligence platform can take data from just about anything, and we want to be using data from every system the DoD has. So we want to be the thing that's so, taking in the data and then being used for command and control. Now, I know that that's probably not going to happen. We're never going to command and control every system. We're never going to actually get data from every system. If we were to get even halfway there, we'd probably get an antitrust lawsuit. But if Mark Zuckerberg copy one thing, we don't agree on much, but set goals of being hauled in front of Congress for antitrust seems like a good goal. If that happens, your business is doing okay. That's a big part of what we can do is be willing to work with everybody. It was on the panel before, and it's this idea, not insourcing anything that could be done better elsewhere. And I think Admiral has that same philosophy. The reason that's important for breaking down those barriers is if it's difficult for the services to data prompts even integrate all the stuff. But if you go to the data prompt harder and say, no, I don't want to integrate that, I only want to integrate this, I'm only going to use my own stuff, that makes it harder for them to break down their own barriers. If you go and say, I'll work with everybody, including all of your political rivals, in your own organization, then that makes their job a little bit easier, just a little bit.
Hey, Palmer. Joel and I are co-founder of a startup out of Notre Dame. We're a blockchain startup. But we really focus on, in the defense department, we focus on zero trust. We just raised a Series A of 25 million. Just wondering what kind of advice you have for a up-and-coming startup that's like, we're heavily into defense, but also looking at that dual-use technology.
Well, since you just raised it around, you're doing right, you're doing more than a lot of companies. There's a whole bunch of pieces of advice that I can give. Two things that come to mind are, one, there's a difference between building a good company and an investable company. You can actually do one without doing the other. But the trick is trying to build both. You get a lot of people who bootstrap their companies, and that's why they're vials for the first few years. Just me and a couple buddies, and we weren't making any money. But it wasn't until we were actually able to raise money that we were able to really supercharge our growth, hire a bunch of people, and really actually make a go of it. And so one of my pieces of advice to companies is don't just think, how can I build a profitable business, a scalable business, a good product? Because those are important, but those are not what you need to be an investable company. To be investable, you need to be, first of all, visible to all of the investors that are across the country. Like I was doing some homework ahead of this. So California is about 200 times more venture capital investment in Indiana. Which is way outsized given the differential in economy actually not even being close to that. But a lot of that is visibility. It is figuring out how you're going to pitch your business in the context of getting people to understand where you're going, not just now, but 10 years ago, how does this turn into a $1 million business someday? And a lot of people don't want to do that because it totally sucks. And you're basically making marketing materials for finance people. You're marketing yourself to finance people. And that's way more boring than marketing yourself to customers or to recruits. But you have to do it. You have to speak the language. You have to convince them why you're going to be profitable, why you're going places, how you're going to have an exit, why their money is good, why you're going to have good corporate governance that means their money's not going to get blown away. And that was something that I learned how to do at Oculus. I have customers, but I also have to market to investors. The second thing, you probably already know this, I think a lot of companies do not think enough about where they locate themselves, especially relative to having the right congressperson. So this is, you probably know this just better than anybody, but being in a place where you have a congressman who's willing to represent you and fight for you and fight for the interests of the district is actually a huge deal, especially when you've had the other side of it. Like, I'm not supposed to get too political, but I'm going to anyway. My congressman was hardly rude about it. He was the congressman where my business was, where Andrew was. He was the worst. Hate that guy. He was worse than useless because he didn't support military, he didn't support law enforcement, and he actually ran attack ads against me. Literally, he ran TV ads that were just me. I'm like one of the biggest employers in this district. And it's just, you can't you'd think, wait, why would anyone rationally do that? Why would you literally run ads attacking the executives of one of the largest companies in your district? The answer is, it wasn't practical, it was political. And so putting yourself in a district where you can have representatives actually can help you. Well, man, that's great. Actually, we ended up moving. We jumped out of that district in Irvine, and now we're in Costa Mesa, and we hopped districts to get away from him. Now he's not even in an office anymore. So he got beat, but suppose he hadn't, but that wasn't, we basically jumped our business. We moved our headquarters, 650,000 square foot headquarters. Not only because of this, but largely because we needed to be in a place where we had someone who was on our side. So that's something that small companies don't think about enough. I think most companies are not going to get attacked by their congressman, but there's a lot of companies who locate themselves in a district where they're not getting any help, especially in California. And that's not a great position, to be in. Imagine that. Can you imagine attacking your constituents and being like, "Boy, these guys are out. This person is absolutely awful. He's a war profiteer, etc., etc."
You're welcome to Northeast Indiana.
So I love Indiana, I love the congressman and everything, so it's good.
You're in good hands.
Who else? Middle of the room.
So Palmer, you talked about the need to invest more in the future. Congressman, you developed the Future of Defense Task Force report, which is my second favorite document coming out of Congress, the first being budget.
Wow.
But so how successful have you been about convincing colleagues, program managers, the financial folks about investing in the future, particularly whenever you've got the moving Chinese threats, you got the events in Ukraine right now. I'm just wondering how that works and what we can do. I'm from Naval Surface Warfare Center Training Division down in Southern Policy.
There are lots of reasons to be hopeful. I co-chaired the Future Defense Task Force with Seth Moulton, a Democrat from Boston. We spent 6 months with meeting and studying the issues, and we wrote a report. And I can give you all a copy of it if you want it. It's a great read when you can't sleep at night. But the good news is that we have the leaders on the Armed Services Committee, especially in the House, who believe in it. I believe the industry believes in it. You're hearing from Vanderwall, and one of the biggest disruptors and innovators in the defense space is Palmer Luckey. But one thing that I saw a lot of was that, General Dynamics is here. I spent a lot of time with General Dynamics and learned about all of the innovation that the prime defense companies are also already engaged in as well. So it's happening across the board. And one big reason why is we don't have a choice. We have to innovate. We've had our heads stuck in the sand, literally, in the Middle East, without a greater focus on competition with China and Russia, Iran. And that's why the committee is investing more there. We're going to hear from Mike Rogers to talk about this in a little bit. Mike Rogers is the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, and a really good chance that Olga's the majority in the fall, and that he'll become the chairman of the committee. So he gets to set the priorities. I know this is one of his biggest priorities too. Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that I would add, kind of already touched on, but the good news is that the zeitgeist is moving in the right direction. Like I think 10 years ago or 15 years ago was not necessarily the case. There was universal agreement that we were not investing enough in innovation, that we were not investing in the right technologies across the board. I think most people, almost anywhere in government, if you ask them that, they'd have an understanding and recognition of that problem. And then the even cooler part is that I think that's true even among the voting population. If you ask them, hey, do you think that we are, is our military doing the right things? I think there's actually, at the population level, a lot of recognition, like, no, we probably need to be investing more in future technology that's going to be able to counter China. Like, to your point, we've kind of had our heads in the sand a little bit, focused on the counter-terror threat. And, it's only recently that people have kind of started to wake up, on a broad level about that. So I think that's a good sign, because if everybody's aware of the problem, like, will you make the right decisions? Maybe not, but at least you're going to be trying to make the right decisions instead of not even making any decisions.
See Marshall Sanders, there's a hand in the back of the room, Marshall, and then we'll go to the back.
Hey, Lawrence Walter from the IBC. Thanks for being here. First of all, Oculus is epic. Thank you so much. My kids love it. They're 8 and below, and they use it for STEM learning, and they're learning way faster than we all could have. So thanks for that. And my question is just about how do you see the future of virtual reality in defense?
So there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, a lot of this is, so I worked at the ICT Mixed Reality Lab on Great Mind Program, like I mentioned, but the first thing that virtual reality is going to make a difference in is just training. A lot of people don't know this, but the US generally has more fatalities every year in training than in combat. And so if you are going to, there's a lot of work to build technologies to reduce fatalities in combat. That's thousands of different technologies all working together, some of them very, very expensive. VR, on the other hand, has the potential as a single technology to eliminate more death than fixing every single combat problem combined. And obviously, the point of combat is to achieve strategic objectives, not just to have no casualties. But I think that the coolest thing about VR and DoD is that it has the potential to replace huge swaths of training that are very, very dangerous. Not all of it. There's going to be some things you're just never going to be able to get away from. But there's a lot of stuff, especially when you're talking about vehicle simulators, where virtual reality can make a big difference. Beyond that, I'd say that the interesting thing about virtual reality is the DoD has been one of the longest term adopters of virtual reality. So before Oculus, back when nobody cared about VR, back when I wasn't able to raise money because every investor I talked to said there's never been a successful VR company in history, there's hundreds of failures, and so we're not going to invest in you. So Peter Thiel's Founders Fund was the first one to be able to take that $7 million check. And then everyone wanted to invest in us. But anyway, rewind to before that, there had never been a successful VR company in history. The military was still investing in VR through things like Breakmine and a bunch of other Army programs. So the DoD has actually been the most forward-looking entity in the whole world on virtual reality for decades now. So these criticisms I'm making of DoD not being innovative enough, I would say they don't extend to virtual reality. That is one place where they saw it coming way before anyone else. They've been investing in it way before anyone else. And they're probably just going to keep, some people, they're like, oh, like, what are they going to do now that it's everywhere? And I said, well, trying to keep doing the same thing they've been doing for 30 years with it. They're going to be doing more training, they're going to be doing more treatment, they're going to be using it for data visualization, command and control. None of it's actually new. It's just cheaper now that the headsets are $300 instead of $30,000.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your foresight look into the future of warfare. And with AI being a very important component of success in a strategy standpoint, we really have to, I think as well, and what we already have, that's one of the questions here, the connectivity, the cyber concerns that we've got. We've got major challenges in this nation, both with our industrial base as well as with our military contract base in protecting the connectivity. How would you address that proposal from your company's standpoint?
Ooh, that's tough. So we've been asked by customers to just straight up get into cybersecurity, and I've mostly declined because there's so many companies that are tackling that area. It's not an area that I think I could do uniquely better than most of them. So most of what we do on the cybersecurity front is honestly not that crazy. Like we follow industry standard best practices and end-to-end encryption and hardware tokens on either side, and making it hard for anyone to intercept stuff. I'd say the only thing that we've really done on that side is one of the nice benefits of having autonomous vehicles and autonomous sensors where you're actually processing data on the vehicle instead of streaming that data back home is that you can make do with far less data, orders and orders of magnitude. So imagine that I've got an aircraft that has to stream data back home continuously. You have a guy sitting and he's watching all of that. Maybe it'll be back home, maybe it's just a few miles away. That means that for every vehicle I have to have a high bandwidth, high resolution video feed. There's only so much bandwidth in the air that I can use to push all of that. And if the enemy decides that they're going to jam it, there are ways they can jam it that I can get around, but there are ways they can jam it where I'm just screwed. There's nothing that I can do. The nice thing about autonomy is that you can say, okay, I'm not going to have to stream this, this crazy high resolution feed. I'm going to process it on the drone. I'm going to be tracking my target. I'm just going to stream back target location, target vector, target speed, and then maybe a crop snapshot every few seconds or even every few minutes to give you an update on roughly what's going on with that. All of a sudden, I need 1 million times less data than I did before. That means that I can do communications techniques that don't rely on a continuous feed that's easy to detect and easy to jam. I don't have to rely on high bandwidth communications that limit the number of assets I can have in an area. So autonomy actually helps a lot with networking on the practicality side. Obviously on the security side, you still need to do a good job, or you're gonna have a bad day.
Thank you, very good answer.
Thank you, I'm glad to hear it.
So I think there's this perception or reality that a lot of small businesses have left the defense industrial base over the last couple of decades, right? You obviously had a very successful exit. I assume you looked around and there's any number of things you could have done. Could you expound on why you chose to focus on the defense industry for this sort of next go?
Sure, it's because I was terrified. I looked at it was kind of a three-part problem. One, the big tech companies were, I think, advocating responsibility for working with DoD. I mentioned earlier, we've never seen this in U.S. history, but I want to take that a step further. Imagine we had seen that. Imagine if in the run-up to World War II, I'm not talking about during the war, but in the run-up to the war, imagine if General Electric or Westinghouse had said, I'm not sure we really want to work with DoD. We really feel like Imperial Japan is a huge revenue opportunity for us. Or imagine if during the Cold War, if you would have had Boeing or GM saying, we really, really love America and all, but I feel like we really need to keep the Soviet Union on an even playing field because it seems their economic system, it may actually end up dominating. So, we really need to hedge our bets. If we had seen that, we would have been in a really bad place, but that's exactly what we're seeing. Our largest companies in the whole country are refusing to work with DoD. When Facebook bought my company, they immediately killed all of our DoD work. When Google bought Boston Dynamics, they immediately killed the Funny Dancing Robot Company. They killed all of their work despite them coming out of DoD research programs. When my friend's augmented reality company that was working with the Air Force got purchased by Apple, they immediately had all of their DoD work killed as well. And so the problem is not just the big companies, it's the small companies that are getting acquired by these other companies. So and I'm not beating on government too much, but when the government fails to make a small defense company successful, they're not just delaying the ability of them to deliver technology. If they can't be successful, a lot of times they're going to get sucked up by the enterprise side of things, by the consumer side of things, and they're just gone forever. So it's not just slowing them down, it's that they just disappear, and that fact is now off limits to DoD entirely. And it's also very hard for defense companies. So what I actually did is when I kind of got worried about this, I started going out and trying to find defense companies that I could invest in. And I was kind of like a penance thing. It was like buying indulgences. I thought I could use my money to pay off the guilt of me getting pulled off of working with the military myself. But what I found is that it was really hard to find investable defense companies because there were so few. And I'm not talking about companies that I could invest in. I'm talking about ones that were able to raise money from other investors. In the last 35 years, there were only, so in the investment community, there's a term of unicorn. Somebody might be familiar with. It's a private company with a valuation of over $1 billion. In the defense industry, in the last 35 years, since the end of the Cold War, there have been 2 unicorns in the defense space, and that's it, until Andrew over the third one. But before that, it was Palantir and SpaceX. And SpaceX is debatable because they actually just want to use Mars, and the DoD is just a customer convenience on the way to that. And I know Elon would agree with that, so I'm not stabbing in the back. So two unicorns in 35 years. Compare that with basically any other industry. Did you know that in fast casual dining, there's been over a dozen unicorns in the same period? Did you know that there's a half dozen mattress companies that have achieved that same thing? Did you know that there's about 80 biotech companies, over 100 social media and gaming companies? That there's something like 40 automotive technology companies, 100 financial technology companies. Basically, the problem is every other industry has generated far more success for startups than working with the government. And so because of that, like working in government is not attractive to a lot of smart founders because they're like, well, wait, why would I want to start a company in an area where it's so hard to succeed? Investors say, why would I want to invest in an area where it's hard to succeed? It doesn't matter how good their tech is. I just don't believe the government can make a new company successful. They're all in on the old guys. And then smart employees don't want to go work at small defense companies. Because they're like, oh shoot, why would I want to work at a place where there's basically no chance they're going to grow to a large scale? And then it finally goes back to what I talked about earlier, which is the only people who are working in the defense startup space are irrational people, or rational people who are nonetheless ignoring what makes sense. I got into this because I looked at this landscape and said, well, shoot, like, clearly it's not gonna solve itself organically. The free market is not going to solve this problem. There's no rational economics reason for companies to solve these problems, but I have a ton of money. And, looking at things a different way. Palantir and SpaceX, they were both founded by people who had just sold their companies for millions of dollars. So look at it a different way. Every person who's a billionaire who started a defense company in the last 35 years has been very successful at it. And so that was kind of my thinking was, okay, I've got a lot of money, I can help break through. Someone asked the question earlier, if I'm a small business, how do I hire somebody to work on contracts to help get through that? When I started our company, we had a business development person and a lawyer for every engineer we had. Not anymore, we're about 90% engineering. But I got into this because I knew I could afford to do that, and most companies can't. And it's worked out pretty well. We just signed a $1 billion contract with SOCOM doing counter-drone work. We've done a lot of work with the CBP, securing the borders. We do a lot of work with the Marine Corps, securing their bases and giving them a lot of imaging tools. And I've been rambling for a while now, but I guess bottom line is I got into this because I'm terrified of other countries surpassing us on these technologies that matter. I did not feel like we're in a good place. No offense to defense primes here. I don't think that our existing defense primes are the ones who are the leaders in artificial intelligence and autonomy. Those people are trapped mostly in big tech companies, optimizing search engines and advertising delivery. And I'm trying to build a company where I can go to them and pull them out of those useless roles and put them to work on something else. I'll end it with this. Once I had this thought that we were going to get left behind, that there wasn't a way to solve it, that got me very motivated to work in the defense space. And so what I do with a lot of people is, even the ones that I can't manage to hire, I try to put a mind virus in them, which is, one, this is an important place, you should work in defense, but two, your job is useless, meaningless, and you are throwing away your life if you spend your career optimizing the number of people who will click on your augmented reality mustache emoji. And the best part is there's a lot of people where we try to recruit them, and even if we don't manage to recruit them, they end up quitting within a few months, and they tell me, yeah, I don't want to work for you guys for whatever reason, but I did realize I was throwing away my life, and I'm going to go do something else. And so if I can help get even just a few more people to get out of these just useless parasitic businesses that made me a lot of money, then I'll feel a lot better. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question. Sorry for going on so long on that.
We got time for a couple more questions.
You touched on a little bit of your fear with what other countries are doing. Could you talk a little bit about your experience with China?
Oh, yeah. Well, we could talk all day about this. I've experienced everything you can imagine in China. Like, I've discovered wiretaps in product samples that were given to me. I've had my engineers' hotel rooms broken into and things stolen by them, almost certainly by the government. We had all kinds of crazy stuff. We had all kinds of crazy stuff that we had to deal with. But the fundamental thing to remember about, and there's people who are going to say that I'm being prejudiced, but I don't care. A lot of people, they say, oh, you can only criticize the Chinese Communist Party, you cannot criticize the Chinese people because that's prejudice. And I would say that you actually can criticize them on a cultural level as well. There is a different culture in China around the concept of innovation and what innovation even is. Here in the United States, we have a strong idea around protecting inventors, right? People who come up with good ideas, who invent things, and that's why we have patents, that's why we have intellectual property laws. That's when we allow people who are creative and smart to be rewarded for that. In China, it's not like that. The person who comes up with the idea, like whatever, nobody cares. There's not even any social capital in being the guy who comes up with the idea. There's only social capital in being the guy who gets it done the fastest, the cheapest, and actually wins in the marketplace and gets your thing out to the world. But I'll admit, as an engineer, that's a little bit attractive. If you just ignore the long-term effects of making innovation, not rewardable, but it's kind of cool that, wow, like, you only get rewarded here if you actually make it happen. You can't just come up with an idea, you have to actually be the guy that makes it happen. The downside of that is that they don't mind stealing technology from each other. They don't mind stealing technology from the United States. And there's not even ego in it. There's no ego. Like, here in the United States, if you ripped another guy off and everyone knew that you ripped him off and then you made more money off it, you might be able to make money. Let's say you figured out the legality, you got around his path or whatever. But in terms of social credit, people thinking about you, everyone would know that you're just a rip-off artist, and you wouldn't be respected, and nobody would want to work with you. Over there, that doesn't exist. And so we need to recognize that cultural reality that they are willing to take things from us, and they're willing to even do them worse and cheaper, and they are not, there's no sense of pride that is going to stop them from doing that. And that is one of the things that worries me the most, is seeing them be really aggressive about doing this, and nobody has any problem with it. And I think here in the United States, we have such a culture of respecting innovation, respecting people who come up with ideas, that it wouldn't even occur to us that people would run an entire industry that way. One really short story, just to illustrate another problem is, we have so many US companies that are totally dependent on China. They can only make stuff in China. And this was actually true with Oculus. So our lenses, we got quotes from the United States, some vendors to make our optics. It was it was a hybrid Fresnel optic. So Fresnel on one side, aspherical curved lens on the other. Nobody had ever made anything quite like it. We were getting quotes from the US on $6,000 per lens in quantity. And in China, we had 3 companies that could do it for less than $1. And it was because they had incredible technology. Basically, they were injection molded lenses that were temperature controlled. So you basically were flowing coolant through the tool that you were injection molded into with temperature sensors, hundreds of them embedded in the tool, so that it could actually differently cool and heat parts of the tool as it cooled to ensure that it cooled perfectly uniformly and you wouldn't have any distortion in the lenses. Nobody in the US could do that except for a handful of defense vendors that were building like missile seeker optics. So yeah, we could do that. It's going to be $6,000 each. And so we were forced to make that part in China. And then one of our partners, Samsung, this is speaking broadly again, but Koreans, they hate Chinese. They are really, Samsung was really embarrassed. They would design these high-end displays. They would only be manufactured by Chinese fabs. And that's because the Chinese companies were putting billions and billions of dollars every year into these facilities, and there's no facilities anywhere like it anywhere else in the world. And so the best panels that Samsung made were not made in Korea. They were actually designed in Korea and then manufactured in China. And they were embarrassed about it. They were always talking about how they wish that they could invest billions in their own fabs, and they just couldn't quite get it together. Bottom line, the thing that terrifies me about China is not just that they're good, that they're better than us at some things. Whatever, that's fine. Lots of people are better than people at other things. Japan makes better sushi than us. I don't care. The problem is that our economy is so dependent on them being better. And if China were to decide to act in a really economically aggressive way, the things they could do are way beyond those things. Apple could be destroyed. Apple is our largest company. It's the largest company in the world, the largest company in the United States. They could be destroyed by China overnight. China could just say, you're not allowed to manufacture here anymore. That's it. That would end them. They would have no revenue, no products. It would take them years to build up capability elsewhere. And by the time they did, they would be years behind everybody else. And that's the very top example. And you go down the list, it doesn't get better. You're familiar with, recently it was revealed that China had agreed to a secret $275 billion investment deal in China to be allowed to continue operating there. They're going to invest $275 billion in Chinese manufacturing and technology. Imagine we're talking about, the Congress here saying, oh, we're going to put like $5 billion towards building chips here in the United States. And, I'm proud of that, I'm not doing that. But how does that compare to $275 billion in Chinese manufacturing? What could that money do if it were here in the United States? That's really what I'm most terrified of, is they've got us by the balls.
Final question. Right behind you, Landon.
Hey, so Ryan Whalen with the Defense Innovation Unit. So Palmer, thanks for doing some great work with Israel. I want to go back to your opening thesis for Israel, and you mentioned starting a product company that does business, sells commercially viable tech to DoD, not the other way around. So I think you mentioned the challenge that we have with innovative thought, innovative thinking in the DoD. I think we have a lot of wicked smart people that understand the problems, want to get after them, think forward about how to fight the next fight. The problem is that doesn't extend into our traditional acquisition system, right? And so the ability, I may write requirements today that don't actually get let to the street until a year from now, and then that procurement comes 24 months down the road. That sales cycle is just not supportable, and it sets now 2 years from now I'm buying what I need today, right? And so
Can you talk about how you guys built, the company around being a product company? What some of the kind of business best practices were, what your experience was in building that out?
Sure, I mean, you're talking about the pre-procurement side, but then let's talk about what happens after when the procurement happens. That's gonna be staged, there's going to be risk reduction efforts, white papers, research development. It's gonna go on a long time before it actually becomes a real thing. The problem with government money is that it's so expensive in time. You can only build things when the government is paying you to do them. That means that you're working on government timelines for when you get the money, government timelines in terms of how you account for the money. You're rarely gonna be allowed to go down 3 parallel paths at the same time, knowing that 2 of them are almost certainly going to fail. Nobody wants to invest in those failed paths. They want to take the low-risk paths, even though those low-risk paths may actually be 100 times more expensive and not necessarily the best solution. And so that's really the key thing that we've been able to do is by using our own money, we've been able to go out and say, look, we'll talk to governments, we'll realize that they understand their problems, but we're not going to be dependent on government money to pay for especially early stage R&D. That's been a really key thing for us to be able to go back. So this is why I encourage small companies to raise money if they're working in the defense space. It's like, look, you're only going to do so many things in your life. Do you want to spend 10 years getting drugged down the road working on something with duty, or do you want to go out and give up? Yes, you're going to have to give up some portion of equity in your company, but if the exchange for that is that you can use your own money to get done in what would have taken 10 years with them, you can find out if it works or if it fails, and it might fail. You can figure that out in 1 year or 2 years. You're going to get a lot more done in your career. You're going to be able to do a lot more cool things. The other thing that we've done, and I think defense startups in particular need to think carefully about this. I'm sorry, this is going to hit a little bit on DIU. DIU has been really big on pushing dual use, right? We want companies they have stuff that applies to enterprise and consumer, and we want it to also use for military. Sometimes that can work, but one of the problems with that is that consumer and enterprise they're way better customers. You're gonna make more money doing that, and what happens is if you're trying to do military on one side, enterprise on the other, I can almost guarantee how your business is gonna go. Your enterprise side is gonna be better, it's gonna do it faster, your investors are gonna then tell you, why are you wasting your time on this stuff? I don't care about having you need patriotic, you need to know how to make money and deliver a return. You're gonna pivot your business and you're gonna focus on enterprise entirely. And we've had to work with partners, actually some of them have been DIU partners, where they basically had to focus more on their dual use side of things. And so this is where the government needs to do a better job. The government needs to figure out a way to keep defense startups that are full of patriotic people from continuously pivoting away from working with them, even after they wanted to work with them, because they can make more money elsewhere, because you're not going to get the most innovative technology if you go elsewhere. I've followed a really interesting strategy, and it's probably the end of this, but in my company, we're not really dual use. We have a couple things that are a little dual use on like the strategic infrastructure, things like power plants and critical infrastructure, but most of it has been DoD focused. And I've done that for 2 reasons. One, because I don't want to wake up in 10 years and find out that I've built a great oil and gas security company. That's not what I'm trying to do. No problem with oil and gas. I love oil and gas. Interesting. I want to help the military, not refinery profits. And then the second part is, by building a defense-only company, I have made it impossible for my investors to force me to do it. There will never be an enterprise revenue of significance for them to point to and say, focus on that. It's like, look, you're with me, ride or die, working with DoD. If this doesn't work, we're all going to lose a lot of money. And that's actually worked really well for aligning. So sorry for beating on your guy. I know you guys do your thing. I think there are places where it makes sense, but the flip side of that is the government's gotta make it make sense, or you're gonna lose a lot of these small companies. And I'm sure that's something that you guys have to deal with all the time.
Thank you, Palmer Luckey. I hope you get back to Fort Wayne soon.
I will. Thanks.